6 years ago, Codemasters released the video game for the 2019 Formula 1 season, a game they decided to call Anniversary Edition, celebrating the 10 years that the developer had been making Formula 1 games. At that moment, we had the Standard Edition and a Special Edition too. Its name was Legend Edition. This edition included classic content, trying to capture one of the most intense rivalries in Formula 1 history, which was between Ayrton Senna and Prost. So, in this game, you could drive both the McLaren MP45B that Ayrton Senna drove in that 1990 season, and also the Ferrari F190 that Prost drove in that same season. Having available in the game a series of challenges that you can overcome using these two cars, there were also many other classics from different seasons of Formula 1 history, but they didn't quite fit beyond a few hours of playing testing each one, because in the long term, that didn't have much of a future. Since racing a 1990 McLaren against a 1978 Lotus didn't seem like the most logical thing in the world. The following year, in 2020, Formula 1 was celebrating its 70th anniversary, and Codemasters, just like in the previous year, didn't want to miss the chance to celebrate Formula 1's anniversary as well, releasing a special edition focused on one of the greatest legends in the history of Formula 1, which, as you all know, is Michael Schumacher. This edition included, again, classic cars, obviously focusing on cars that Michael himself drove. However, even though these classic cars in both 2019 and 2020 were fun and enjoyable to play with, as I mentioned before, the problem arose when you tried to develop it a bit more in the long run. The issue still had no direction because although it is true that there was a lot to try, we still had the same problem. Races with cars from many years ago that didn't make much sense. So, two of the best releases in the entire history of Formula 1, yes, but it's true that they didn't quite break new ground, so to speak, in terms of their classic content. Even though the content itself was not a disaster, it didn't end up being the incentive they probably hoped for. And this brings us to what we're seeing on screen right now, which I'm sure some of you are wondering about, right? What the hell are we seeing on the screen? It turns out that a few days ago I started a new career mode, but I didn't start it in the F124 game, as you might expect. Instead, I decided to go back to one of Codemasters' classics, which is the one you are seeing on screen. What we're seeing is gameplay from the Formula 1 2020 game, and as you can see, we're doing a classic car race. But it's not just a normal classic car race, because as I mentioned earlier, in these games we had standalone cars from different seasons, but never a complete season. However, what we have in front of us is a race in the Bahrain Grand Prix. In fact, it's not a race because it's a championship mode. And now someone might ask, but wait, this can't be done in the Formula 1 2020 game. You can't do a championship for a full season. And here's the key. This is not the base game. This is a mod created by a modder that turns F1 2020 into F1 2007. Using the models of the classic cars that F1 2020 has. You can see that this car is actually the McLaren from 2008. And the Ferrari is also modeled after the McLaren from 2008. But it uses 3 to 4 models from this game to then apply all the liveries from the 2007 season, all the helmets and all the names, even the faces can be changed, completely transforming this F1 2020 into the Formula 1 2007, which never existed. And this is where I wanted to get to. What does all this have to do with F1 2025? Because the title is very clear. This is what Formula 1 25 should do. Well, let me tell you. But first, if you're enjoying what you're watching, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any Formula 1 content. Well, as you all know, this year, in the 2025 season, Formula 1 is celebrating its 75th anniversary. This would be a perfect moment for Codemasters to return. I mean, to the classics. To include a special edition, an edition that appeals to the history of this sport. But doing it a bit differently from what they showed us in those years, 2019 and 2020. Instead of introducing different cars from different years in the history of Formula 1, my proposal is the following. Aside from the current season, which obviously has to be in the annual video game, Codemasters should introduce a complete classic season, and here you have the perfect example. As I said, aside from the current season, which would be 2025, there would be an option in the game that would allow you to do a championship or a career mode with just one classic season. You're not going to be able to play with different cars from the 80s or 90s, no. You'll only be able to play with the cars from one classic season, but you'll have access to a ton of content that you can take advantage of in the long run, like doing a career mode. Because I've realized while doing this career mode, how important it could be for a current Formula 1 game to have 2 variants of career mode. For example, one person could do their 2 to 3 seasons in the normal career mode. From the 2025 season, but then you get tired of it. You want to change something, and it would be perfect to have this second option once you've, so to speak, burned out the current season option. Being able to switch to another classic season with different regulations and different types of cars would give not just 1 but 7 more lives to a video game that really needs players who want to play it, because it's true that people get bored of this game very quickly since it has very few new features. And what's the key to all this? There was no game for the 2007 season. And this is very important because obviously if someone gives me the example of, I don't know, 2011 season or the 2010 season, you could say, well, but there's already a game for that, so it might not make as much sense. Formula 1 has many years where there was no Formula 1 game. The 2007 season is a really good example. A very recent season, but it didn't have any dedicated game.
So, it would be the perfect option to include this type of content. Think about that. It would be like,
we're not just offering you the official game of the current year, in this case 2025, but we're also providing an alternative to a season that you never got to play. And obviously I do want to point out one thing. For me, it would not simply be introducing cars practically without any license, as was the case with the classic cars of 2019 and 2020.
This classic season should have all the license and regulations according to that season.
That would partly be what brings that difference in gameplay and the feeling of not playing the same thing. And I know that here comes a problem that some might already be thinking about. We don't have the circuits from the 2007 season because obviously the calendar was different. Okay, we have to accept that we're not going to get a 2007 season exactly like the one we had back then, because there are circuits that not even Codemasters has recreated. But what Codemasters can do is introduce a series of circuits that they've had in the past which aren't in the current games, to create a bit of an alternative calendar, or even if they really want to put in the effort, they could even include some of those circuits that aren't on the calendar today, but were in 2007. And I'm sure a lot of people at this point will say that this is all about nostalgia, that it's because the game is one of the old ones, one of the good ones, because they are also classic cars, and that all of this makes the experience seem much better. And you couldn't be more wrong. Of course, nostalgia is important in all of this. Yes, it is. But one thing is clear here, and that is that the artificial intelligence, the AI of this F1 2020 is much better than what we currently have. You don't get those unbearable trains that form in F1 24. The AI doesn't have any kind of cheat on the power straight. The head-to-head racing is simply spectacular. It's an AI that makes it a pleasure to compete against, and the game, as you all know, is very well made. And also, with 2 seasons so far apart in time, I can assure you that the whole race feels very different. It would help a lot to avoid that repetition, that feeling of constantly racing the same thing. And it would be one of the great solutions that I would have to implement. Are we giving up the chance to drive many types of cars this way? But I think the change would be worth it. Because in this way, a door would be opened for Codemaster.
You know,
to create tons of classic seasons in future games. And I think this could really help encourage people to buy it, because you wouldn't just have one season, but you might also get a classic season that you really liked. This would obviously be a significant leap in terms of the quality of the video game. The question is,
can this be real? Are we going to see this?
The answer for me is sadly very clear, and that is that I obviously think it is not going to happen. If we were talking about 5 or 6 years ago, I might think that Codemaster, I could do something like that, but at this point I am actually extremely pessimistic and I don't think it's possible. And this would obviously require some sort of leap in the current Formula 1 video game. And we don't seem to be at that point. That's the problem. I think the direction that the Formula 1 series has been taking, in this case with Codemasters and EA, is very poor. It's a shame because I think it would be a great idea. But unfortunately, as I've said, I don't see it even a little bit feasible for this to happen in the near future. There are those who might also say, but hey, there are a lot of things to fix in the normal base game before thinking about including extra content from other seasons. Of course. And if you haven't seen this video, I have linked up here, where I talk about 7 urgent updates that F1 25 needs to introduce. I recommend you check it out. However, I wanted to share my opinion with you and what I think could be a great leap for Formula 1 games. And also, I'd like to know your opinion on what you would think about something like this, and if you would really prefer it over the classic car system we've had before. If you liked the video, as always, a good like is appreciated. Subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.